Hi, friends and family,
Welcome to Hope After Addiction
with your hosts, Katie Comer
and Chelsea McLeod.
Hi, welcome to Hope After Addiction. We are so happy that you've joined us today. How are you?
I'm good. Glad to be back to life and out
normalcy.
Yeah.
It has been a minute since we've been back in the studio because, and we're getting this out a little late to you this week, so we apologize, but we have been snowed in.
Yeah.
Last week was no bueno. We were texting with Carlos, our producer, and Chelsea, just trying to figure out times, and it was interesting week.
Yeah. We never expected it to last that long, but it did.
I know. So yeah, we were talking about how it was like, and if you're from like where it snows a lot, God bless you, but it does not snow here like it does there.
Yeah.
And so even an inch of snow throws everybody in a chaos. Well, we got like 8 inches.
Yeah.
How many did you get?
It was about that.
Yeah, we got 8 inches. So everybody was in panic mode.
Uh-huh.
It was awful, but it was beautiful,
It was beautiful.
but it was awful.
Got a
After
lot-
7 days.
Yeah. We were all ready. We're ready for spring. I got a lot done though. That's the thing
Yeah?
I love is like the forced slow down, like drawers, closets, just cleaning out.
Yeah,
It's
I
my
don't know.
favorite.
I mean, yes, I got a lot of cleaning done, but I had my kids home with me all day.
Yeah.
And so they require attention.
Uh-huh.
But I got like extra quality time with them. So that was
True.
good.
Yeah.
Their school got canceled for a full week. So
Yeah.
God bless the teachers.
That's right. Forced slow down. I know. They were all really excited.
Yeah. Anyway, so we're
Unexpected.
back to it. We are grateful to be back in the studio. We're grateful to be back with you all. We have a fun little podcast today, just talking about something where it's something Chelsea came up with the idea, but it's just so important about caring for the souls of people with what we have gone through, and making sure you're caring for the souls of those people who've also gone through the same stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's just, when she sent that to me, I was like, yes. And it's actually something that I've been reading in the Bible about, is being that witness to the people who really, really need it. So, so we're going to be talking about caring for souls and why that's important for you, why it's been on our hearts, and essentially why we started the podcast is caring for the souls of the people who are listening, and what you all are going through. And it might not be a loved one who's addicted. It's, it could be anything. We have listeners. I hear people all the time come up to me and say, hey, none of my family's struggled with addiction, but some of the podcasts that you do about surrendering your life and, all this stuff, it really speaks truth into me, even though I'm not dealing with the same stuff you did. Yeah. So whatever you've dealt with, whatever your story is, whatever God's brought you through, use that to care for the souls of the people that need it. So that's what our podcast is about today.
Yeah. It's exciting. I was actually in a retreat meeting Saturday for one that I'm serving in February, March. But the speaker that day, this is what he said. And I was like, man. Yeah. I mean, and I hadn't taken a note yet because it was kind of in the beginning. And I like plopped my notebook open and I was like, because it's so good. And it's our heart because it's what we've been through and to share. But the verse that this one goes back to for me is 2 Corinthians 1:4-6. So God comforts us in all of our troubles so that we can comfort others. When others are troubled, we will be able to give them the same comfort God has given to us. So when we are weighed down with troubles, it is for your benefit that we can be encouragement to you. And I was like, it's so good because, in the Bible, it's like our two greatest urges and even biblical laws from God is to love God and love people. And I feel like we live in such a world that there's a great divide right now because it's also saying like put up major boundaries, like say no to people, but God also calls us to command us to love people. Yeah. And so there is that fine line. Yes, there's boundaries. Yes, there's this, but we are called to love people no matter what. Yeah. And to use our story, to use our pain. Like that's why we go through what we do. Yeah. For someone else. It's not for us, Yeah. Yes, it changes us. Yes, it grows us, but God wants to use it. And so that charge is you are called to care for the souls of people. Like that's what we are here on earth to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a heavy charge.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, especially at the very beginning, I'm trying to think back to when I went through everything. It was such a shameful time that I didn't really want to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because you're in like the midst of it, and you really can search your heart and when you're ready to speak about it, because it might not be time for you to share. But at some point, there's a stirring in your heart, and that might be the Holy Spirit just stirring in your heart to share your story. And that might just be even sharing. Maybe there is a women's ministry leader or a men's ministry leader, and that you share your story and say, hey, if you ever know of anybody that's really struggling with X, Y, or Z, just know that I'm available to talk to anybody. So you can tell somebody that has a bigger influence. If you're like, well, I don't know how to anybody. I don't know. I don't want to post it on Facebook.
Right.
We're not saying that. But you can find somebody that has maybe a bigger influence. I remember I met with my women's ministry leader at my church for lunch one day. She actually asked me. So sometimes that kind of falls in your lap, right?
Yeah.
You know, and God's kind of moving that way. But I remember this was like when I first moved to Smyrna. But she had heard about my story because of what Adam does. And so she had heard about my story, and she invited me to lunch, and I shared with her my story. And I gave her that opportunity, saying, hey, if you know of anybody that's really struggling, or I actually love to public speak, you know, and I do, I really like that. The one-on-ones are harder for me, but I still do it. But the public speaking is something that God's kind of called me to some too. And so she's given me several opportunities at church to share my story, and that's led to some one-on-ones and ultimately this podcast. So just keep an open mind about who you're speaking your story to, because you just never know.
Yeah.
You never know how that can be used. So.
Yeah. And that's the part of leaving it in God's hands, and pray about it. I had a friend yesterday, I was talking to her, and she'd been praying about doing mentoring younger girls. And she got a call this week from somebody that she's actually really close with, a young girl in high school, and asked her, you know, and she's like, you don't understand. Like, I've been praying for this. Yeah. And so this is one of those things, ask God, like he will send that to you. And like Katie said, leave it in the hands of God. Approach somebody that has that bigger influence. Yeah. Say, here's my story. I'm ready to use it. And then let God send the people, because it's not in our control. Like, God knows exactly who you're going to talk to and who you need to talk to. But it's us having that willingness. And I did. I mean, y'all know from the other podcast, I hid my story for a little bit. Like, I wasn't ready to talk about it. But then once I was like, all right, God, like, I'm saying yes to whatever you need, whoever you need, and however vulnerable you need me to be. Hence why we're sitting here.
Sharing all the nitty gritty.
Yep. Yeah. I would say my first point just to this is the worst thing that we could do with our pain is to waste it. And it's the exact thing that the enemy wants us to do. He wants you to keep your mouth shut. He wants you to not talk about it. He wants you to not share. He wants you to not talk about your hope, your redemption, your restoration. He wants to literally silence you. And so remember that in these times when God's asking you to share, is that the enemy does not want that, and he will try and stop it with everything that he has. Yeah. And so he wants to kill all of your witness, all of your family, anything that you have. So when it comes time that God's calling you to be bold and to be vulnerable, remember who's trying to shut you up. Yeah.
I just think of that just makes me think of when we first started this.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was years.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it probably was that we kept going back and forth, like, God's wanting us to share our story, and we have good banter. Yeah. We love each other. Yes. And we knew that God was calling us to something, but we didn't want to do it. No. But it was the enemy telling us, and even like coming here to record podcast every week or every other week, you know, it's, you know, the enemy tells us, shut that mouth. Yep. You're not good enough. Yeah. What you have to say, nobody's going to listen to. You don't know what you're talking about. And I have a group of girls that it's like an accountability group. I love that. And almost every time that I come up here, I'm like, I'm going to podcast today. I just don't.
Yeah.
I don't know if what I have to say is good enough. And
Yeah.
so it's always, I know it's the enemy, and he's wanting to shut us up because of what we have to say. He's wanting to shut your mouth about your testimony and what God has done in your life. So if you think you're not good enough, that's incorrect. That's Satan.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's such a good point.
The doubt. Yeah, because
He will do what he wants to do.
And I can't tell you how many nights, especially over one specific podcast, that he kept me up for weeks after I did it.
Oh, I remember that.
Before it was released.
Yeah.
Weeks. You said too much. You shouldn't have said this. You exposed too much. And it was one of the top ones that I got comments on. And I was like, okay, God, this is why the fight was so hard the last couple of weeks, is because it's exactly what somebody needed. And so he'll do that. Like, the enemy is a jerk. Like, he will do that stuff.
He's the worst.
But that's why it's like so important to have that foundation of truth, is God does call us to care for souls. Like that is our charge in life here on earth, life between two gardens. That is our charge, is to love people and care for them. Yeah. And the enemy doesn't want it.
And ultimately just bringing, bringing others to see Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean,
ultimate.
and that's why we're put here on earth, right?
That's why we care for souls, is to lead them towards the cross.
to the cross, and to see his face in the midst of darkness. Because ultimately, if you're listening to this podcast, you're going through it. And we know that a lot of our listeners are going through it, and whatever it might be. A lot of them are going through it with a loved one who's in addiction, and we know that. And our charge to you is for you to look at the face of Jesus and see his goodness. Yeah. And you might be rolling your eyes
I know.
right now because you're in the middle of it, and we get it, and we've been there. I've been up and down the aisles when I first was dealing with this, up and down the aisles of Christian bookstores looking for a book saying how to stay with your husband who's addicted to whatever. I don't know. I just remember I needed somebody to point me to Jesus. Yeah. Even though I was a believer, even though I was a Christian and a believer in him, I did not see his goodness in that moment. Yeah. And so you are charged to show people God's goodness.
Yep. And in the midst of that, when it's dark and like Katie and I, like, you can't see ahead, you can't see the future. And I encourage a lot of the women that I work with, God is going to use this. I know you can't see that right now, but somebody ahead of you is going to need you. Somebody ahead of you is going to need your story. Somebody's going to need your tears. Somebody's going to need your hope. I know you can't see that right now because you are in the fit of the storm, but one day you will see it. And hold on to that, because you're not going through this for nothing. God will use this for good if you allow that. And it's encouraging to hear that, because right now you don't see ahead. You don't see what's coming. All you see is even that. How am I going to be equipped? Like, my husband is addicted to drugs. Like, how is God going to use me? The world's going to judge me. Let me tell you, sister, it's not the case. Like, it's not.
Yeah. And a point to that is nothing is surprising to God. God already has your story laid out. We say this a lot, and it's a good point to note too. I feel like the Lord's impressing this to say, but it has worked out for us. Our husbands have found freedom. That is not always the case. And we realize that. And your loved one might not find freedom. We hope that they do. We realize some people who are listening to this, their loved one has passed away from addiction. And your story is not our story. But God has your story already unfolded. He knows it, and that is your story. And when you are ready to share it, know that there are thousands of people that need to hear your story. If your loved one has passed away, worst thing, right? Worst thing that can happen. We have people that
listen.
I know that we want to have on our podcasts. Reach out. That need to hear your story, and that there is hope even after loss. And so know that nothing is a surprise to God. Your story is not a surprise. If your loved one is still actively walking in addiction, and you've tried and tried for years, and you're just like, I just need some hope. Your story matters because somebody needs to hear it.
Yep.
Right?
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
It's so good. And I think about my friends that I walk so closely with right now that have lost loved ones, and like, what a testament they are to me. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'll have one sit in my chair and have one specifically at the salon, and I'm just like, whoa. Like, what a testament you are to me and your faith. We have dear friends that we've grown very close with in the last 6 months, and like to hear them talk and share, and it's just like, whoa.
Yeah.
And I know for John and I, especially for one, we're blown away. And John's exact words is, I pray that if this ever happens to me, I can have the faith like you do. And it's just, like Katie said, no matter what your story is, no matter where it is, no matter how you think it ended, like God is still writing your story. It's done. It's finished in him. He's in all the details. But like, he has a plan for wherever you're at. And there is somebody that needs you. It's like I told the one that is at the salon, I was like, girl, you have no idea how many people need your hope right now. Because there's mamas at home that have lost their son that don't have what you have.
Yeah. We can get them on that podcast.
Oh, I know.
I know. We're praying for it.
Yep. She texted me recently. She's like, I think I'm getting closer.
Good.
Yep.
Yeah. I think it'd be good.
So I'm excited about that.
So we've talked a lot about knowing that we need to care for souls. We know that we need to share our story. And what does that look like once you are caring for somebody and God has put them in your life? What are some ways that we can care for the souls of people? And how have we gone about that? What is one thing?
I would say even when it commands us to carry each other's burdens, like that's what we're called to do. It's also very heavy. And I've learned that working in ministry for the past 6 years, whatever, that I have to be right in my spirit and I have to have that full cup to pour into others. And I have to constantly ask God for that strength because it gets heavy. I mean, it gets heavy, and even we get the worst of the calls. We hear when the things happen. We hear when the deaths happen, when the relapses happen, all of it. And so for us to be prepared to carry those burdens, because that's what we're called to do. Yeah. But to also prepare our hearts and be in the right standing position with God so that we can carry other burdens. And that's been a very important one for me, is to make sure that I'm standing right so that I can help. God walked alongside of us, and so we're called to walk alongside of others.
Yeah. Our foundation has to be strong.
It has to be strong.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. What about you? What do you have?
I talked about sharing our testimony, just being open and vulnerable.
I have that one on here.
I think that one of the big ones when I talk to somebody who's going through it is just being their prayer partner in it. Yep. Because I do know that there was a time in our story where I was just actually kind of just tired of praying about it. I was just like, I needed people to come alongside of me and pray for me, essentially, and hold me up in this. And so sometimes people are just tired. They're tired of, they love their loved one and they know that prayer is important, but sometimes they just need you to come alongside of them and intercede on their behalf and pray over them, pray for them through this, and hold them up.
Yeah, and it's crazy. And my husband's a lot better about this than I am. I'm really working because he's bold. I'm not. But it is crazy, and he'll be in a super deep conversation, and as soon as he says, can I pray for you? It breaks. And like, you will watch grown men crumble. You will watch women just fall, and it's the power of prayer, and all it takes is somebody saying, can I pray for you? And it is just, it's insane how powerful it is. Yeah. And like there may not even be words, and a lot of times it just requires us to listen. They don't need us to speak. Sometimes they just need us to listen. And then followed or ended by a prayer. There's so much power in that. There's so much strength in that. And that's such a good point, is just prayer. Yeah. Prayer over them, prayer for them. Because y'all know that in the middle of it. I don't know what to pray. My words are gone. I don't know what to say. Yeah. I'm numb. I'm completely traumatized. Like, I don't know. But that prayer circle of people that is what's power around you when you can't.
Yeah. So offer that to somebody to be their prayer warrior on their behalf. And I think that that'll go a long way. You know, every story is so different, and every journey is so different.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important to share what's helped for you. And you can say this might not be the path that God has you, but offering what's helped for you. And we offer our suggestions all the time. But providing maybe some biblical counseling for them. Because we know that that's helped us. Just offer practical advice on maybe books, Christian counseling, just different things that they can actually grab a hold of tangibly to help them. Just practical advice through that, I think, is important too. Saying, this is what helped me. I journaled. I always talk about the contract when a loved one comes home. That's a practical thing, saying, hey, when they come back home, this contract that they have to sign saying, this is what's going to help me earn that trust back. So just like practical advice so that they can have steps that they can do to heal. Essentially.
And I think that's important too, because I found with a lot of people, like, I can't be there 24 hours of the day to walk through, to talk through, to do all that. And so it's important also to have those resources, like the books, the podcasts, whatever it may be. So even at the 2:00 hour, the anxiety hour, when you're up in the middle of the night, your friend that's struggling can go to those sources, can go to Jesus, like point them to the things when a human being can't be there to answer that question, or in the middle of the night when you're alone, because that's where they're going to find who Jesus is in the middle of all this. Like, give them those resources that point to Jesus, just like you said. So when we're not there, when they're alone at night, I remember so many of those nights that I could run to those books, that I could run to those Bible verses or those podcasts that where God could speak directly to me. Because Katie and I are humans, and I have to remind my girls that we're humans, we're broken humans. Like Katie said, we have our story, you have your story, you have your story. And so having those sources where people can learn who Jesus is through it all and their story. Because that's where so many of my lessons came. Were in the middle of the night when God spoke to me so audibly about things that happened or that I needed to focus on or whatever it be. But that's a really good, and have those ready. You know, have those ready when you have a person that you're working with to just pour into them.
That's beautiful.
Another thing I wanted to mention was vulnerability that you had mentioned. It is vital and so important. And I learned through even infertility and addiction is I didn't want to talk to anybody that hadn't been through it. I'm like, you don't know. You don't know what it feels like.
Right.
You don't know this pain. You don't know this betrayal. And so once I started being vulnerable, I mean, it's crazy how many people were coming out of the woodworks like, what? You've been through that? Like, what? You did IVF? What? Like, your husband struggled with addiction? And so it's so important for us to be vulnerable and be completely transparent about what we've been through. Don't hold back, because somebody needs that. They don't need the perfect human sitting there.
I remember that there is power in being vulnerable. I remember when I was sharing our story to my church one time in front of a women's event. And we actually there was 2 other women who had been through different stuff, through a divorce and then through sickness, I believe. And at the end, it was just so powerful because the person who was in charge, she stood up and said, if you've been affected by addiction, whether yourself or a loved one, please stand up. And like half of the room stood up. And it was so powerful to know, and you know that there's a lot of people dealing with addiction, but it was so powerful to know that you are not alone. And you look over at that next table and you see 2 or 3 other people and be like, wow, they have a story.
Yes.
They have a story. Have they ever shared it? I don't know. But there's power in sharing your story so you don't feel alone. And by the end of that time, through divorce or through cancer, everybody in that room was standing up.
That's like one of my favorite stories that you tell, because we are literally souls walking through this world that all have a story and a battle and a trial. And until you're in a moment like that, you don't realize how just tangible that is, that we're all walking through life with messes. And that's why we are called to care for souls, because we're all messy.
Yeah.
We all have a storm.
It's true.
So
You got anything else?
I think that's it.
Okay. Well, ultimately, people just need us to love on them. They need us to point them back to our Savior. They need to see God's goodness. And your story, whatever it is, has God's goodness all over it. And we know that. He has been so good to us, even though we've been through hell.
Yep.
And it's God's goodness that allows us to share with you what we've been through. And we charge you to share God's goodness with others in whatever journey you're dealing with. So we thank you. We hope that we have offered some sort of encouragement to you today. We hope that you have a beautiful day. And if you are listening to us on YouTube, make sure you give us a like and a subscribe. And if you find us on Instagram or Facebook, make sure to share that. That's how we kind of get the word out that we even exist. And so reach out to us if you have any questions. We hope you have a beautiful day, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.